Joining us today, we have Todd Zolecki, Phillies beat writer for MLB.com and author of Doc, The Life of Roy Halladay, which is out everywhere now. You can go and grab yourselves a copy. Todd, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. We're happy to talk some baseball here. And, for those that are looking to pick up a copy, as we mentioned, it is available everywhere. But you will notice as well, too, for those that are picking up a copy north of the border, you're going to have Doc in a Blue Jays uniform. For everyone stateside, you'll have Doc in a Phillies uniform. So kind of a cool concept there. Who came up with that to market it based on location?
Yeah, that was the publisher, and that was something I honestly never even knew was a possibility. And when we were talking about the book, they said we kind of had this idea because obviously Doc is a Blue Jays legend, but in Philly he had the no-hitter and the perfect game, and they said we think we might do two different covers, and I guess because of I don't know, barcoding or whatever, it's not that hard to do. So I was like, well, that seems to make a lot of sense. So the hardcover, yeah, there's a Blue Jays cover in the States. He's in the Phillies uniform. And what's been kind of funny is I've had people in the States email me or reach out to me and go, I don't want Roy in the Phillies uniform. I want him in the Blue Jays uniform. I said, well, you're gonna have to go to Indigo or get on Amazon.ca or something like that to try to purchase the Doc and the Blue Jays cover, but it's worked out really well. Now in the paperback, which is coming out, they're just going to do he's going to be in the Phillies uniform on the cover, and on the back is going to be the Blue Jays cover. I just, for whatever reason, but the hardcover is kind of cool. I was really happy with that.
Yeah. I was going to say, you're creating a black market here for people needing to reach out to their Canadian friends and get a hold of the collector's edition items there, right?
That's all. Yeah, exactly right.
So, I mean, Roy was legendary in his dedication and preparation to get ready for each and every one of his starts. Didn't matter whether it was the middle of July or a postseason start, right? Like, what sort of things did Doc do to mentally and physically gear himself up that really separated himself from some of the other athletes you've covered over your career?
Well, he had a very, on the physical side of it, he had a very strict workout routine. I mean, every minute of every day had a purpose to it. You'll hear about athletes being hard workers and whatnot, but he kept a binder of everything that he did every day, how he felt after he did it. So, in other words, like, so if the following May, he started to not feel so good, he could go back to the previous May and go, okay, what was I doing then? And how did I feel then? Oh, I kind of felt the same. This is not that big of a deal. Or, what did I do last week? And how could I tweak that? How can I change my off-season training regimen? So, teammates would always say, like, when I got to the ballpark on Tuesday for a 7:00 start and it was 1:36 p.m. and 28 seconds. If I needed to find Roy, I know where I could find him because he was always in the same spot doing the same thing every single day, 2 days after a start. I mean, that's how down to the minute, that's how precise he was. And so he did that. He watched a ton of film. He kept notebooks on every hitter he faced, how he attacked him, what he learned from it. So the next time he faced him, he could maybe tweak something, keep it the same if it worked really well. And then from the mental aspect, he was a big believer in Harvey Dorfman, the mental ABCs of pitching. He carried that book with him everywhere he went. He would read passages constantly. He carried the book with him. Roy Halladay, before a start, he'd go, I'm not feeling too good about this. And so he'd flip to a page about umpires or mental preparation or whatever. And it never stopped for him. And one of the Phillies' athletic trainer, Scott Sheridan, said it was almost as though as soon as his start ended and he got into the trainer's room, his mind started spinning towards the next start. It's like it never ever ended for him.
Yeah. So with all these giant thick binders there, he would have been a good person to be friends with in high school there, because you could just get the notes for absolutely everything from him then.
That's exactly right. He had everything, anything he needed.
Yeah. So Especially in the early part of his career, though, it wasn't a, rocket launch to success. He had his ups and downs there. So if someone had have told you in, say, 2000, that Roy Halladay was going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, 8-time All-Star, 2-time Cy Young winner, like, what would your reaction have been watching those early years of Doc Holliday out there?
You would say, well, what the heck happened there? Because he looks really, really bad right now. I mean, he was bad. And, I write about this in the book. He had a 10.64 ERA in 2000, which to this day remains the highest ERA in baseball history of any pitcher with more than 50 innings. And, I went back and I looked at other Hall of Fame pitchers. And I think like the next highest one was like Lefty Grove one year, had like a 6.5 ERA at the end of his career. So like Roy Halladay's worst year as a Hall of Famer was 4 earned runs worse than the next Hall of Fame pitcher. So like that never happens.
Yeah.
A pitcher that bad, and I looked at the other pitchers that were underneath him in terms of single season ERAs, and it's like a list of nobodies, players that like blew out their shoulder that year and never pitched again, guys in the last years of their career. Those were the people that ranked underneath him. And so it's kind of it really is remarkable. And I talked to Chris Carpenter about it, and I did a real nice interview with him at the end. I said, anything else I think I should know? He's like, I don't think people really appreciate how far he fell and how high he had to climb out of that hole that he was in. It's like, I really don't think that people understand like how deep in it he was. And, then you look at the historical background of it and it really kind of all makes sense.
Yeah, well, that's just it, right? People, and especially the younger listeners who are listening to this here, who remember the dominant Roy of later years, like they don't understand how rocky it was and how close he actually was to pitching himself out of the major leagues for good in the early part of his career. So, with that historically bad ERA, especially in the year 2000, and they send him down to, I think it was single A ball even that they sent him to rework it. What was it that Roy and Mel Queen, the Jays pitching coach, like what were some of the things that they tinkered with to sort of rebuild him, not only mentally and physically, but just even in his delivery and his pitching mechanics? Like were there 1 or 2 things that they really zeroed in on?
Yeah, so like with Roy, when he came up, because he was so successful in high school, he was like really over the top. Like pitching motion was like that, kind of just coming straight over. And they called him Iron Mike, like the old pitching machine. It was like just a lever, a metal lever that would go and fire a batting cage. So they called him Iron Mike. So his fastball had no movement. It came in straight, and his curveball, he couldn't throw for strikes. And so what happened early on in his career is hitters would just lay off the curveball. Like, he can't throw this pitch for a strike. And if he does, it's lucky. I'm just going to wait for him to throw a fastball in the zone because, and it has no movement to it. And so what Mel Queen did is, from a physical standpoint, is he told him to throw sidearm. And so Roy basically, he didn't throw sidearm, obviously, but he dropped his arm slot to like this, kind of like 3/4 slot. And then he taught him how to throw a sinker and a cutter. And in talking to people that were there when it happened, they said it was like immediate. Roy thought he was throwing sidearm, but really it was only like 6, 7, 8 inches off to where he was throwing. Mm-hmm. Sudden the ball started moving. So he would try to throw a ball in the middle of the strike zone, and the sinker would kind of tail in on a right-hander. It would tail away from tail into a right-hander and away from a left-hander. And the transformation was almost instantaneous. Mm-hmm. So Mel gets all the credit in the world for kind of, imagine telling a former first-round draft pick, you're going to be out of baseball in 4 months if you don't listen to everything that I tell you. Either you're going to be a first-round bust, or you're going to have a shot to make it. And to Roy's credit, he goes, okay, let's try this. And the other thing that Mel did is he kind of broke him down mentally, to understanding that he wasn't as good as he thought he was, because he was always kind of like a big fish in a little pond, and now he was just, his wife, Brandy, said he was just kind of a fish in the ocean, like at that point of his career. So he needed all the help he could get, and he took the advice, and he was off and running after that.
Yeah. Well, like you just said too, all the credit goes to obviously Mel for putting that program together, but also huge part to Roy because especially if you think of today's modern athlete there and how coddled they are all the way up through high school and college and all of that, you got to wonder how many people really would have taken that advice to heart versus, nah, I know better. I'm going to shop around to find the diagnosis or whatever that I want to hear from this as well too, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of just because they've had so much success, it's so hard to tell somebody to change.
Mhm.
But I think, Roy had Mel was really tough on him. And I think that helped. I think if it was kind of just like your average run of the mill pitching coach that really wasn't so forceful in his suggestions, that maybe he wouldn't have listened. But I also think the fact that like Roy was so bad, that 10.64 ERA, which I mentioned, and he was getting hit as bad or worse that spring training, that he knew like, okay, well, clearly this is not going to work.
Yeah.
So what do I have to lose at this point? Because I'm just getting obliterated every time I go to the mound.
Yeah.
So he decided to change. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in the pantheon of competitive athletes there that you've covered over the years, where does Roy Halladay rank sort of in that list? Because it's not just baseball that he wanted to beat you at; he wanted to beat you at everything off the field as well, too.
Yeah, he was hyper competitive. He just liked to be great at everything. So like if he wanted to be the world's greatest fisherman, he wanted to be the world's greatest golfer. Anything that he did with his teammates, he wanted to be the best at, or have the best things to help him be the best at it. Yeah, he was an incredibly intense competitor. Um, Teammates knew on the day that he pitched, do not talk to Roy Halladay, because he came in this like bubble almost, in the zone, and you knew not to approach him. Like some pitchers you can go up to on the day they start if you're a teammate and just get, hey, how's it going? Blah blah blah. With Roy and talking to seasoned veteran teammates, guys like Jason Worth and Chase Utley with the Phillies. You knew not to approach him on game days because he was kind of he was thinking about how the day was going to go, and he replayed the at bats that he had with every hitter so often in his head, or kind of previewed the at bats he expected to have with every hitter so often, how he was going to attack him, etc. That he said that when he stepped on the mound, he kind of felt that all the work was done and he could just let his body take over at that point. He was almost on autopilot in a sense.
Mhm. Yeah. Do any particular stories of his off-field competitiveness stick out to you when you're looking back on it there?
I just know that, like, in terms of like fishing, Brandy basically said that his wife Brandy said that, in the off season or whatever, because he wanted to be a great fisherman, he would get the best boat, the best reels, the best lures, or a fisherman might need. With golf, he would get the best gadgets. So she said in their garage, there are just tons of golf gadgets, fishing gadgets, anything like that. And it was because when he went fishing, he wanted to catch the most fish. When he went golfing and he worked on his golf game, when he played with his friends, even if it was just Chris Carpenter and some of his Blue Jays teammates or some of his Phillies teammates, he wanted to be good at it. So I think that's probably the thing that sticks out about Roy.
Yeah. So there was no, oh, we're gonna go out for a nice afternoon fish, have a couple pints, and see what bites. Like Roy would have kept you out on the water till he landed at least one or two. Then, eh?
Yeah, I think so. He would have his pint or two here or there. Chris Carpenter told a story one off season. They were in Brazil and they were on the Amazon, and I think they had a couple pints, and they decided to jump into the Amazon for a couple minutes just because it was Roy's idea. It was Roy's idea. He's basically like, come on, how we literally are never going to get the opportunity to say we swam in the Amazon River.
Yeah.
And Chris Carpenter's like, yeah, but there could be like piranha in there. It could be crocodiles and snakes. He's like, let's just jump in for a few seconds so we can say that we did it. And they did it, of course. that was one of my favorite stories about Roy, because it showed how much fun he liked to have away from the ballpark.
Yeah. So outside of immediate family, the people who probably know Roy the best, or at least his tendencies, weren't maybe even necessarily teammates, but would have been, his strength and conditioning coaches, his pitching coaches, the people who are putting him through the paces day in, day out, and actually see, how his mind kind of works there. So when you were putting this book together, was there one or maybe even two particular people who were just amazing interviews, just fountains of knowledge about Roy that really helped you put it all together?
Yeah, really, like what you just said. George Poulos, who is the longtime Blue Jays athletic trainer, he was instrumental in the book. Donovan Santos, he was the former strength and conditioning coach for the Blue Jays. He provided tons of detail just about, how Roy would, Donovan would have to go running with Roy on the road, or even at home outside Rogers Center. Like they would go running along the path or along the lake. And, Donovan would tell these funny stories about how they'd be out for a 25-minute run and they would be running hard. And then all of a sudden, they would be approaching Rogers Center, and then somebody training for a marathon, some random person, man, woman, whatever, training for the Boston Marathon, for instance, they would just sprint by Roy near the Rogers Center. And Roy, being a competitor, he's like, I can't let that person beat me. And so Roy would run that person down. The way Donovan told it was kind of funny because it's funny because like Roy was fit at minute 23 of a 25-minute run, a hard run, but at minute 23 of a 25-minute run. And this person was probably in the first mile of a 15-mile run. And they had no idea that they just passed Roy Halladay, but Roy Halladay's like, I'm not letting this person pass me before I get to the ballpark. And so Roy would run him down, and it happened on the Charles River in Boston. It would happen in Baltimore on the Inner Harbor. And then, he also told a great story about at Old Busch Stadium. They ran the ramps all the way up to the top of Busch Stadium. And then they ran one lap around and figured it was like a quarter of a mile around or something like that. Or, and Roy said, let's just run a mile as fast as we possibly can do it. Let's just see how we could do it, just so we could say that we did it, and Donovan's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. And Roy just wanted to time himself and see how fast he could do it. So there's all those types of stories. Dong Lean, who's the Phillies strength and conditioning coordinator, Scott Sheridan, who's the Phillies athletic trainer at the time, they told me all sorts of great stories as well. Dong was great because he told me, he's like, he would always listen to like this. I'd be stretching him out before starts, and he would be listening to Only Time by Enya in his headphones. I could hear him listening to that, like, an hour before a start or half an hour before a start or whatever. And which I think is just fascinating, because sometimes you think of these athletes and you think of them like maybe listening to heavy metal or rap or whatever to get super fired up. But he would listen to this very calm and soothing music, because for Roy, so much of the game was mental and he had done all the physical work. So he was kind of putting himself into this Zen state before he stepped on the mound, which I always thought was neat. So those guys, like you said, like they knew him better than anybody. And I mean, without those four guys and a few others, the book wouldn't have been any near as detailed as it was.
Yeah. So there's probably dozens of non-baseball fans out there who have some strange stories of, there was this weird hulking guy who chased me down by the river there, who had no idea who Roy Halladay was there, but he's just part of their life.
Yeah, exactly. I think, was that Roy Halladay or what? This 6'6" guy just ran. It was such a weird thing. This 6'6" guy ran me down once by Rogers Center. That was probably Roy Halladay if it was, between 2002 and 2009.
Yeah. So do you think, looking at the entirety of his career, Roy would be remembered differently had he actually won a World Series? Because when you talk about sort of the modern greats, the names like, Maddox, Clemens, Johnson, Martinez, they come up all the time, but not as often do people really discuss Roy Halladay and the career that he had there.
Yeah, I think there could be some truth to that. I think that's certainly possible. You think of like when you talk about all-time greats, like Ernie Banks is an all-time great. He never made the playoffs, so maybe he's not mentioned as much. There are certainly those types of players, but I do know that in talking to players that played against Roy and with Roy during his peak years from really when he came back in 01 from the minor leagues through 2011, they say that he was the best, if not the best, one of the top 3 pitchers in baseball. And I think nowadays the modern fan has more of an appreciation for how hard baseball is and how it's not just one guy. Like I vote for MVP every couple of years as a member of the Baseball Writers Association. And, in the past, it used to be like, well, you can't name Mike Trout MVP because his team stinks. But you can name this guy MVP because he helped his team get to the playoffs. It's like, and I get that, but it's you need a whole team. It's not like the NFL. I guess like maybe the NHL a little bit where you have a couple superstars and they can kind of help carry a team. You can have Roy Halladay on your team, still not win. You can have Mike Trout on your team, still not win. And so I think the modern fan has an appreciation for that. So I feel like people maybe appreciate him more than maybe they would have if he pitched in the 50s and dominated but never made the playoffs. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if we fast forward then maybe like 50 years, what sort of is going to be the narrative around Halladay? Like, is he going to be one of those guys that people are still talking about, or do you think he might get maybe lost in the shuffle a little bit when we are talking about some of the best of that era?
I think he will still be talked about, and I think he'll still be talked about because he was kind of the last of a breed of old school pitcher. I mean, and I don't have the stat correct, but I looked this up maybe like in the offseason at some point. I don't think there's a pitcher. I think if you looked at like Roy Halladay from like 2002 to now, I think he still like leads baseball in like complete games and shutouts or something like that. It's a crazy stat. We're basically saying like, he was the last of this old school breed, a guy that would go out, pitch 8-9 innings, pitch complete games, pitch shutouts. And so I think when people look back 50 years from now, especially if the game doesn't change and it's like these 5-6 inning guys, they're going to go, oh yeah, Roy Halladay, he was one of the last old school guys. And so I think that'll help him live on. I think the fact that he had this legendary mental and physical approach will live on. And I think the fact that he had only one of the 2 postseason no hitters in baseball history, and he had one of the 2021 perfect games in baseball history. I think that'll kind of help him endure.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, look at the state of the Blue Jays right now with their rotation and their bullpen. They could use a guy who can go 8-9 innings. Like, my God.
I mean, every team could, and you know what I find is interesting is that like I wonder how Roy would, like, if his approach would change now or not, because he talked about this a lot. I found these quotes from him, and I put a lot of these quotes in the book on how a perfect game for him was not 27 strikeouts, because that would mean 3 pitches per batter. It was 27 pitches, 27 outs. Like, he wanted players to hit the ball immediately. Like, he was attacking. He didn't waste pitches. Freddie Freeman said that to me. He's like, I love facing Roy because, if he threw 110 pitches, everyone was going to be competitive. Whereas today, if a guy throws 110 pitches, like 40 of them are just balls out of the hand. They're just wasted pitches. And so you wonder if, like, Roy was here today, if he would, I assume he would continue to attack guys that way because the stuff was so good. But it's amazing in the sense that more pitchers don't try to do that. They will just waste pitches and they'll rack up their pitch count. And Roy did not want to rack up his pitch count. He wanted to go out there and get guys early and get him quickly.
Yeah. So I feel like I know the answer to this just because you are a Phillies beat writer there. But to you, which season was more impressive of his 2 Cy Youngs there? Was it the 03 season or was it the 2010 season? And why do you rank one above the other there?
Well, I think I would say the 2010 season, but I would only say that because the perfect game in that postseason no-hitter fell in there. And I know that the postseason thing was postseason and you don't vote on postseason stuff in terms of Cy Young Award. But I just think if you look at the 2010 season as a whole, that was the most impressive. And I think because Roy himself had been watching like Chris Carpenter, his good friend Chris Carpenter, pitch in the postseason for years with the Cardinals. And he had always wondered how would I do in that situation? Would I like step up like my buddy Chris? Would I be terrible? Would I feel too much pressure? Would I, seize the moment? And so the fact that he seized the moment, I think, was really cool. But I think, in 2003, Brandy said that was such a cool moment because he was so bad just 2 years before that.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, he did that in the American League East.
Yeah.
Facing the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Orioles. The Rays weren't so good back then, but facing the DH and David Ortiz all the time, and so they're both equally. You could make strong arguments for each of them. I think the newness of it makes 2003 special in its own right.
Yeah. And like you just said, 2010, what a season that was. He's got a perfect game and he becomes the second player to ever throw a postseason no-hitter there. So if you look strictly at the numbers in the 150 years of baseball that have been going on, there have been over 200,000 regular season games played and something like 8,000 postseason. So by the numbers, the perfect game is actually the harder feat to accomplish, even though two people have only ever done the postseason no-hitter. So Roy Halladay aside, Todd Zolecki is on the mound. Which would you rather have on your resume? A perfect game or becoming one of two postseason no-hitting?
I think I would take the postseason no-hitter just because of the stage it was, the stage that it is. And you're right. The perfect game is so much harder to accomplish, but I just think there's something for stepping up in the postseason. Now, the way baseball's going nowadays, where it seems like somebody throws a no-hitter every day, like maybe 5 years from now, there'd be like 8 postseason no-hitters and it won't be a big deal anymore. So maybe my opinion will change. At the moment, I just think that, that is the ultimate pressure moment, because if, you get a perfect game in the regular season, tremendous accomplishment, but there's not as much pressure to do it. Whereas like there's pressure just starting the game in the postseason. It's like he's starting game 1 of his first postseason career, postseason start of his career. So he's like, I don't want to go out and stink. And not only did he not stink, he was amazing. It was one of the best performances ever. And it's funny about that game is you talk to some of his teammates and they go, he was way better that game than he was in the perfect game. Like way better that game. The first couple innings in that perfect game in Miami, he was kind of struggling with the strike zone. He kind of benefited from some borderline calls. But they said in that postseason game against the Reds that Raul Ibanez said after watching that first inning, he's like, oh my God, he's going to do it again. Like he's going to throw a no-hitter or a perfect game. Like they were like, oh, this is amazing. He's even more dialed in than he was in Miami in May of 2010.
Yeah. All right. Last question before we let you go here, Todd. Is there anyone currently pitching in the MLB that reminds you a little bit about Roy Halladay there, or has some aspect of their game that is similar to his? Or do you think that, like you were saying earlier, he might be the last of his kind and he sort of broke the mold there?
I think the guy that immediately jumped to mind when you asked that is Max Scherzer.
Mm-hmm.
I just think because he seems, he pitches deep into games. He's been dominant for an extended period of time. And I think he's just hyper competitive. The guy, remember a couple of years ago, he was taking BP in the cage, and I think he bunted a ball off of his face, or swung and fouled a ball off of his face. And he made his next start against the Phillies and like shoved it against the Phillies. Like he was amazing. So I think like he's the guy that comes to mind as maybe most closely to Roy. He strikes out more guys than Roy. But again, Roy was a little different. Not to say that Max doesn't try to do this, but Roy wasn't pitching for strikeouts. He was pitching for early contact, hit my pitch. You're not going to hit my pitch. If you do hit it, you're going to, break your bat on, fist it off your hands, or, hit it off the end of the bat and make a slow roller to the opposite field, that type of thing. So I think Max would be the guy. I think Roy enjoyed watching him pitch.
Amazing. All right. Well, for those that are listening right now that want to either follow your work at MLB.com or connect with you on social media or even pick up your book, where are the best places for them to go and check out any of those things there?
So on social media, I'm at Todd Zolecki, Zolecki. On Instagram, Todd Zolecki MLB. And then, anywhere you can buy a book online. So in Canada, Indigo, I like to show them some love because they were nice to me during the pandemic last year. And then, anywhere else, I know the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame sells my book there. They've been super nice to me. So yeah, but make a long story short, anywhere you can buy a book online, you should be able to find it. If you get the hardcover in Canada, you can get the Blue Jays cover. If you get the paperback, you'll get him in the Phillies uni with the Blue Jays uni on the back. So whatever your preference is, I appreciate the support in any way, shape, or form.
There you go. And if you get the hardcover edition there, maybe buy a couple extras there, and then you can try and swap them for a Phillies cover there down south of the border too.
Exactly right. Exactly right. That's perfect.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us today, Todd, and best of luck with the rest of the MLB season.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.